The Arizona Territory, 1,878. Dust swirled around Rebecca Caldwell as she urged her wagon forward, her faithful retriever Rusty panting beside her. The desolation of the landscape matched the emptiness in her heart since losing everything back east. She had no destination, only a desperate need to outrun memories. As dusk fell, she made camp near a small creek, unaware her fire had been spotted. Morning brought the silent Apache, his weathered face unreadable as he studied her through narrowed eyes. He spoke just 7 words that would change everything. "Stay, if you feed my cows." But what was he really asking of her? Could this broken woman and the solitary warrior find healing in the most unlikely of places? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca stared at the Apache man, her hand instinctively dropping to Rusty's head. The dog's muscles tensed beneath her fingers, but he didn't growl, simply watched with alert brown eyes. "Your cows?" she finally managed, her voice rough from days of minimal use. The man nodded once. 7 head, good cattle. His English was accented but clear. "You stay here." He gestured to the small clearing by the creek. "You feed them." Rebecca glanced at her wagon. Everything she owned in the world was packed inside clothes, a few books, her husband Thomas's pocket watch, their daughter Sarah's favorite doll. All that remained of a life shattered by influenza. "Why would you trust me with your cattle?" she asked. Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps surprise at her direct question. "Land is good here, water clean, but I cannot stay all days." He paused. "You have nowhere to go." It wasn't a question. He had read her situation as clearly as if she'd explained it. "I'm Rebecca Caldwell," she offered. "Running Wolf," he replied after a moment's hesitation. Rusty sniffed cautiously at the air between them, then sat back on his haunches, apparently deciding the stranger posed no immediate threat. Running Wolf reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew something. When he extended his hand, Rebecca saw a perfectly crafted obsidian arrowhead resting on his palm. For cutting, for protection, he held it toward her. Rebecca accepted the arrowhead, its edges sharp enough to slice skin with the slightest pressure. "Thank you. Come, I show you shelter." He turned without waiting for her response. Rebecca hesitated, then clicked her tongue for Rusty and grabbed her rifle from the wagon before following him. A 1/4 mile from her campsite, nestled against a low ridge, stood a simple adobe structure. Its walls were weathered but solid, the single window covered with a wooden shutter. Running Wolf pushed open the door, revealing a 1-room dwelling with a small fireplace. "People before left," he explained. "Long time empty." "Settlers?" Rebecca asked. Running Wolf nodded. "Man, woman, they go north. They abandoned it." "Afraid," he said simply. Rebecca understood. Many settlers couldn't handle the isolation, the constant vigilance required on the frontier. Some couldn't bear the silence, others couldn't tolerate the unknown dangers. She stepped inside, Rusty at her heels. The dog immediately began sniffing the corners. The cabin was sparsely wooden frame for a bed, a crude table, a single chair, but it was shelter. More than she'd had since leaving Pennsylvania. "The cattle?" she asked. Running Wolf led her behind the cabin to a small corral connected to a lean-to shelter. 7 cows grazed in a nearby meadow, seemingly unconcerned by their presence. "Feed morning, night, move to water midday," he instructed. "I return 3 days." Rebecca ran her fingers over the arrowhead in her palm. "Why are you doing this?" Running Wolf was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally he said, "Land needs tending. Cattle need feeding." He looked at her directly. "Hearts need mending." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Rebecca to wonder which hearts he means, his or perhaps both. That night, Rebecca moved her wagon to the cabin and unloaded only what she needed: her bedroll, cooking pot, the small wooden box containing her most precious possessions. Among them was her journal, its leather cover worn smooth from handling. As Rusty settled at her feet, she opened the journal, revealing pressed wildflowers and faded photographs. Thomas with his gentle smile, baby Sarah with her wispy curls, the life she'd lost. Rebecca touched her wedding band, which hung on a leather cord around her neck. "What am I doing here?" she whispered to the empty room. Rusty raised his head and whined softly, as if offering comfort. Outside, the cows lowed as dusk settled over the land. "Feeding cows," she answered herself. "For now, just feeding cows." Dawn broke with a startling brilliance that roused Rebecca from fitful sleep. Rusty was already at the door, whining softly. Her first morning as a reluctant cattle tender had begun. The cowshed charges now greeted her with indifferent moos as she approached the corral. Rebecca had grown up in Philadelphia, later moving to a modest home in the Pennsylvania countryside with Thomas. She knew horses, chickens, even the occasional pig-butt cattle were foreign territory. "Well," she said to Rusty, who trotted alongside her, "we'll learn together." By midday, Rebecca's hands were blistered from repairing the corral's weathered fence. Her dress was soiled, her hair escaping its pins. When she led the cattle to the creek as instructed, two strayed repeatedly, testing her patience and Rusty's herding abilities. "You're smarter than they are," she encouraged the dog as he circled a particularly stubborn cow. Rusty barked in agreement, eventually nudging the animal back toward the others. As Rebecca worked, memories surfaced unbidden. Thomas teaching at the small schoolhouse, his voice animated as he explained mathematics to eager and not-so-eager students. Sarah toddling through their garden, delighting in butterflies. The swift, merciless fever that took them both within a week of each other. Her hand went to the wedding band hanging from the leather cord around her neck. The simple gold circle had once represented promise, security, love. Now it was a relic of a vanished world. The afternoon brought dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Rebecca eyed them warily as she secured the cattle in the corral for the night. The first fat raindrops fell as she and Rusty reached the cabin. Inside, Rebecca lit a small fire in the hearth and surveyed her new home. Dust and neglect had claimed every surface. A family had lived here one shad. They too lost someone. Had illness or hardship or fear driven them away? The storm intensified, wind howling through the single window's poorly fitted shutter. Rebecca found herself wondering if Running Wolf was caught in the deluge or if he had found shelter. The thought surprised her. Why should she care about the welfare of a stranger who had given her little more than an arrowhead and a task? Thunder crashed directly overhead, causing Rusty to press against her legs, trembling. "It's all right, boy," she soothed, stroking his golden fur. "We've weathered worse than this." Indeed, they had. The storm of grief that had driven her west was far more devastating than any natural tempest. Rain found its way through the adobe's aging roof, forming puddles on the packed dirt floor. Rebecca placed her cooking pot under the worst leak and used her limited supply of rags for the others. Tomorrow she would need to find materials to repair the roof, another skill she'd have to learn. As night fell fully, Rebecca lit a candle and opened her journal, her fingers tracing the familiar objects tucked between its pages. A pressed violet from Sarah's first bouquet. A sketch Thomas had made of their home, fragments of happiness preserved like insects in amber. Sleep eluded her as the storm raged on. Rebecca wrapped herself in her quilt and sat by the fire, Rusty's head heavy on her lap. She'd been moving constantly since the funeral, spacking, selling, traveling, never allowing herself stillness. Now, forced to stop, she felt the full weight of her loss pressing down like the low ceiling above her. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed. Rebecca stepped outside to find one section of the corral damaged by wind. Beyond it, two cows had wandered to the edge of the creek, which had swollen overnight. As she moved to retrieve them, she spotted a figure on the ridge, Running Wolf, watching. He'd returned earlier than promised. Their eyes met across the distance, and Rebecca realized he'd come to check if she'd survived her first challenge. Running Wolf descended the ridge with the easy grace of someone intimately familiar with the terrain. Rebecca, mud-splattered and disheveled, felt suddenly self-conscious of her appearance. "Storm big," he observed, surveying the damaged corral. "Yes," Rebecca agreed, pushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I need to fix this before the cattle wander too far." Running Wolf nodded, and without being asked, began gathering the scattered pieces of wood. They worked in silence, repairing the fence with efficiency. Rebecca noticed how he tested each repair, ensuring it would hold against the weight of a determined cow. When they finished, Running Wolf studied her handiwork from the previous day. "Good start," he said simply. Coming from him, it felt like high praise. Later, as Rebecca prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Running Wolf spread something on her crude table. It was a piece of buckskin, marked with charcoal lines. "Map," he explained, inviting her to look closer. "Creek here, cabin here." His finger traced the landmarks. "Good grazing here and here, bad water cattle sick if drink." Rebecca leaned over the hand-drawn map, memorizing the features he pointed out. 3 days' ride that way, he indicated west. My people's winter camp. 2 days south, white settlement. Army fort beyond. "Why do you live apart from your people?" Rebecca asked, the question escaping before she could consider its propriety. Running Wolf's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "Some paths walk alone," he said finally. Rebecca understood boundaries. She simply nodded and returned her attention to the map. "These plants good for medicine," Running Wolf continued, pointing to different areas. "These berries good for eating, these kill if eat." The lesson continued as they ate. Rebecca learned about seasonal water sources, game trails, signs of approaching storms, and places to avoid. "Many things to know," she observed, overwhelmed by the complexity of this seemingly barren landscape. "Land speaks," Running Wolf replied. "Just listen." The next morning, he accompanied her as she led the cattle to water. Rusty trotted ahead, already showing more confidence in his herding abilities. "Your dog learns fast," Running Wolf commented. "Smarter than me," Rebecca admitted with a small smile. As they walked, Running Wolf stopped occasionally to point out plants or signs. She might have missed a rabbit's trail, a hawk's feather, a particular cactus with edible fruit. At midday, as they rested in the shade of a cottonwood, 2 riders appeared in the distance. Rebecca tensed, but Running Wolf seemed unconcerned. "Traders," he said, "going to settlement." As the riders drew closer, Rebecca could see they were rough-looking men with pack mules. They slowed upon noticing Rebecca and Running Wolf. "Ma'am," the older one called, tipping his hat. His eyes darted suspiciously between her and Running Wolf. "You all right here?" "I'm fine, thank you," Rebecca replied firmly. "Mighty unusual seeing a white woman out here with—" He glanced at Running Wolf. "My friend," Rebecca said, the word surprising her even as she spoke it. "He's teaching me about the land." The men exchanged glances. "Army's been having trouble with renegade Apaches," the younger one said. "Might not be safe for you." Before Rebecca could respond, Running Wolf stood. Though he made no threatening move, his presence suddenly seemed larger, more imposing. "She's safe," he said simply. "I watch." Something in his tone made the men reconsider whatever they might have been thinking. With reluctant nods, they continued on their way, looking back several times. "Will there be more visitors?" Rebecca asked when they were gone. "Sometimes," Running Wolf replied. "More when seasons change." As they walked back toward the cabin, Rusty suddenly limped, whining. Running Wolf knelt and gently examined the dog's paw, extracting a cactus spine with practiced fingers. Rusty licked his hand in gratitude. Rebecca watched, struck by the gentle care from a man whose people were feared by so many settlers. Just as the land was more complex than it first appeared, so too was Running Wolf. That evening, studying the map he'd given her, Rebecca realized she was no longer just passing through, she was beginning to belong. The rhythm of days began to shape Rebecca's life. She rose with the sun, tended the cattle, worked on improving the cabin, and explored her surroundings with Running Wolf's map as her guide. Rusty grew adept at herding, seeming to take pride in his new purpose. Behind the cabin, Rebecca discovered an overgrown garden plot. Kneeling in the hard-packed earth, she found remnants of previous cultivation, a few persistent onions, some wild herbs. Her fingers sifted through the soil, remembering the small garden she'd tended back in Pennsylvania. "Sarah loved to help me plant seeds," she told Rusty, who sat watching her dig. She'd get so excited when the first sprouts appeared. The dog tilted his head, as if understanding her words carried weight beyond their meaning. Rebecca had brought seeds with her vegetable and flower varieties packed away with other remnants of her former life. She hadn't known why she'd brought them. Perhaps some part of her had always intended to stop running eventually. The work of breaking ground was harder than she remembered. The soil here was different, more clay, less forgiving. By midday, her hands were blistered, her back aching. Running Wolf found her there, stubbornly attacking the earth with a broken shovel she'd discovered in the lean-to. Hard work, he observed, studying her progress. Worth doing, she replied, wiping sweat from her brow. He disappeared without comment, returning an hour later with a clay pot, its surface decorated with geometric patterns. For cooking, he said, placing it before her. Better than iron on fire. Rebecca touched the pot's smooth surface. It's beautiful. Did you make it? Running Wolf shook his head. My wife made. Long time past. It was the first personal detail he'd offered. Rebecca accepted the pot carefully, understanding it was more than just a cooking vessel. Thank you, she said simply. That evening, she used the clay pot to cook a stew over her fire. The difference was remarkable, the heat distributed evenly, the flavors melding in ways her iron pot never achieved. As days passed, Rebecca established a routine. Mornings with the cattle, midday working on the garden, evenings improving the cabin. She patched the roof, repaired the shutter, and swept away years of dust and neglect. Running Wolf's visits grew more frequent. He would appear without warning, sometimes helping with tasks, other times simply observing. He began teaching her words in his language, simple terms for water, sky, cattle, dog. Quechua, he named Rusty one day, yellow dog. Rebecca practiced the Apache words carefully, aware of how her accent must sound to his ears. Yet he never mocked her attempts, only corrected gently when needed. One evening, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the landscape in fiery hues, Rebecca found herself speaking of Thomas. He was a teacher, she said quietly. He believed education could bridge understanding between different peoples. Running Wolf was silent for a long moment. Then, my son would be 10 winters now. My wife, she was called Morning Star. What happened? Rebecca asked softly. White settlers came. Disease followed. Many died. His voice remained even, but Rebecca sensed the depth of loss beneath his words. Some of my people blamed all white eyes. I could not hate so easily. It made me apart. Rebecca understood then why he lived separately from his tribe, why he had offered a white woman shelter on the edge of Apache territory. They were both outsiders, carrying grief that set them apart from their own people. The garden began to show promise. Tiny green shoots pushed through the soybeans, squash, corn, a few flowers. Rebecca tended them like fragile hopes. One difficult day, when memories pressed too hard and the isolation felt unbearable, Rebecca sat in the dirt of her garden and wept. Rusty pressed against her side, offering silent comfort. Later, she found Running Wolf had left a bundle of sage by her door. The gesture spoke louder than words. She had heard her grief and acknowledged it without intrusion. That night, Rebecca wrote in her journal for the first time in weeks. Instead of recording losses, she described her garden's first sprouts. The summer heat intensified as June gave way to July. Rebecca had grown accustomed to the dry warmth, but Running Wolf warned of change coming. Rain time, he said one morning, pointing to distant clouds building on the horizon. Much water, fast water. Rebecca looked skeptically at the cloudless sky overhead. It seems so dry. Change is quick, he cautioned. Must prepare. That day they reinforced the cattle pen, digging trenches to divert water away from the corral and cabin. Running Wolf showed Rebecca how to secure the roof better, weaving new material into the existing structure. As they worked, he handed her a small leather pouch decorated with beadwork. Medicine bundle, he explained. Protection in storm time. Rebecca accepted it carefully. What's inside? Sacred things, herbs, stone from mountain, prayer. She hung the bundle by the door, touched by this evidence of his concern for her safety. The monsoon arrived with stunning swiftness 3 days later. One moment, Rebecca was hanging laundry in the afternoon sun. The next, dark clouds boiled overhead. The temperature dropped as wind whipped across the landscape. Rebecca barely had time to gather her drying clothes before the deluge began. Rain fell not in drops, but in sheets, turning the ground to mud almost instantly. Rusty barked anxiously as thunder cracked overhead. From her doorway, Rebecca watched in awe as dry washes transformed into raging torrents within minutes. The trenches they'd dug channeled water away from the structures, but the force of the storm was beyond anything she'd imagined. The cattle huddled in their shelter, except for only young heifer who had somehow gotten separated. Rebecca spotted her struggling against the current of what had been a dry creek bed hours earlier. Without thinking, she grabbed a rope and ran into the downpour, Rusty at her heels despite his dislike of water. The heifer bawled in panic as the rising water pushed her downstream. Rebecca slipped and fell twice on the muddy bank before reaching a position ahead of the struggling animal. She waded into the knee-deep flow, feeling its surprising strength tugging at her skirts. "Rusty, stay," she commanded, not wanting the dog swept away. Just as she managed to loop her rope around the heifer's neck, her foot slipped on a submerged rock. Rebecca went under, the cold water closing over her head. The current tumbled her, disorienting her completely. Strong hands gripped her arms, pulling her to the surface. Running Wolf had appeared as if summoned by the storm itself. Together, they struggled to shore, dragging the frightened heifer with them. "Foolish," he said, but without anger. "Brave, but foolish." They managed to guide the heifer back to the corral, all three soaked to the skin. Rusty greeted them with frantic energy, checking Rebecca as if assuring himself she was unharmed. By evening, Rebecca was shivering uncontrollably. The exertion and soaking had taken their toll, and fever set in with alarming speed. Running Wolf, who had stayed to ensure the cattle remained secure, found her huddled by the fire, teeth chattering despite the heat. "Bad spirit in you now," he said, his expression grave as he felt her forehead. Rebecca's memories of the next days blurred. She recalled Running Wolf's steady presence, bitter-tasting teas, and cool cloths on her forehead. In her fever dreams, Thomas and Sarah visited her, sometimes comforting, sometimes accusatory. "Why do you live when we died?" Sarah's voice asked from the shadows. "You promised till death," Thomas whispered, "yet here you are, building a new life." "I didn't choose to live," Rebecca argued with her ghosts. "I just couldn't find a way to die." Running Wolf's voice cut through her delirium. "Fight, Rebecca. This not your time." He sang in his language, low and rhythmic. The sound anchored her when fever threatened to sweep her away like the flash flood. On the third day, Rebecca's fever broke. She woke to find Running Wolf asleep in the chair beside her bed, Rusty curled at his feet as if they'd long been companions. The rain continued outside, gentler now. The earth had absorbed the violence of those first storms. A new growth was already emerging, desert plants awakening from dormancy, responding to water's magic. Rebecca watched Running Wolf's face in repose, the hard lines softened in sleep. He had not left her side during her illness, this man who had lost so much to her kind. For the first time since Thomas and Sarah died, Rebecca felt something unfamiliar stir within her, gratitude to be alive. August brought relentless heat between the storms. Rebecca's garden flourished in the combination of rain and sunshine, and the cattle grew fat on renewed grasses. Her strength returned gradually after her illness, though Running Wolf insisted she rest more than she thought necessary. "The fever spirit lingers," he warned, when she tried to resume her full routine too quickly. "Must go slow." Their relationship had shifted subtly since her illness. The careful distance Running Wolf had maintained seemed to have diminished. He spoke more freely, sometimes even sharing stories of his childhood or Apache traditions as they worked together. Rebecca found herself looking forward to his visits, the sound of his voice a comfort in the vast silence of her surroundings. Rusty now greeted Running Wolf with enthusiastic tail wagging, all earlier wariness forgotten. One morning, as Rebecca harvested early vegetables from her garden, the dog's alert bark drew her attention. Rusty stood rigid, facing east, his hackles raised. In the distance, dust rose from the ground riders approaching. Rebecca shaded her eyes, counting at least 6 mounted figures. Running Wolf emerged from the direction of the creek. "Inside," he said tersely, "Army patrol." Rebecca wiped her hands on her apron. "I've done nothing wrong. They not like Apache and white woman together." His expression was grim. "I go." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "This is your land. I'm here because you allowed it. I won't hide you like a shameful secret." Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by concern, but the riders were too close for argument. The patrol arrived in a cloud of dust-sick soldiers, led by a lieutenant whose boyish face contrasted with hard eyes. They reined in their horses before Rebecca's cabin, taking in the garden, the cattle pen, and Running Wolf with undisguised suspicion. "Ma'am," the lieutenant greeted her, tipping his hat. His gaze shifted to Running Wolf. "Didn't expect to find a white woman out here, especially in present company." "This is my home," Rebecca replied evenly, "and Running Wolf is my friend." The lieutenant dismounted, his men remaining on their horses in a loose semicircle that felt more threatening than protective. "Lieutenant James Edwards, ma'am, 6th Cavalry." He eyed the cabin critically. "You living out here alone?" "As you can see, I have my dog and the cattle for company. Running Wolf visits to ensure my safety." The lieutenant's mouth tightened. "Safety might be a concern, ma'am. We've had reports of renegade Apache activity in these parts. Raids on settlements, livestock theft." "Not my people," Running Wolf said quietly. "All due respect," Edwards replied without looking at him, "but that's what they all say until bullets start flying." Rebecca stepped forward. "Lieutenant, I've lived here for months without trouble. The only danger I've faced came from a flash flood, and Running Wolf saved both me and one of my cattle." Edwards removed his hat, revealing sweat-matted hair. "Ma'am, I'm not questioning your judgment, but these are dangerous times. The army can escort you to the settlement at Tucson, where you'd be safer." "Thank you, but I'm exactly where I choose to be." One of the soldiers dismounted and approached the cabin's water barrel, helping himself to a dipperful. As he drank, something metallic fell from his uniform. Rebecca saw it was a brass button, which rolled to rest against her boot. The lieutenant noticed her garden with evident surprise. "You've made quite a home here." His tone suggested he found it inexplicable. "Still, it's my duty to inform you that tensions with the Apache are increasing. Fort Bowie has reported increased activity from Victorio's band." "Running Wolf is not with Victorio," Rebecca said firmly. "Perhaps not." Edwards replaced his hat. "But when trouble starts, loyalty goes to tribe first." He looked directly at Running Wolf for the first time. "Isn't that right, Buck?" Running Wolf's face remained impassive, though Rebecca could sense his tightly controlled anger. "My loyalty to friends," he said simply. The lieutenant's expression suggested he found this dubious at best. "We'll be patrolling this area regularly, ma'am. If you reconsider about Tucson, any patrol can escort you." After they departed, Rebecca picked up the fallen button, turning it in her fingers. A tangible reminder that the world beyond her small homestead hadn't forgotten her existence. Running Wolf watched the dust cloud of departing riders. "They come back," he said, "not a question but a certainty." "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "Does that worry you?" He turned to her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Worry for you. Army not protect Apache friends." The word friends lingered between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully examine. September brought cooler mornings and the reward of Rebecca's labor in the garden. Corn stalks stood tall, their ears filling out. Bean vines twisted around poles, heavy with pods. Squash sprawled across the ground, their bright flowers giving way to swelling fruit. After the cavalry's visit, Running Wolf had stayed away for nearly a week. Rebecca found herself watching the horizon, hoping for his familiar silhouette. When he finally returned, she felt a relief that surprised her with its intensity. "I feared you might not come back," she admitted as they walked to inspect the garden together. Running Wolf studied her face. "Soldiers make trouble for you because of me." "I make my own choices," Rebecca replied firmly. "This is my home now. I won't be chased away by disapproving looks." Something in his expression softened. "Garden grows well," he said, changing the subject. "Soon harvest." The following days established a new pattern. Running Wolf came more regularly, teaching Rebecca how to preserve the coming harvest. He showed her how to dry corn, beans, and squash for winter storage. "My mother taught this way," he explained as they worked. "Many winters of food from one good harvest." Rebecca found herself sharing memories to her mother's methods for canning vegetables, Thomas's favorite dishes, the small preserves she'd made from their Pennsylvania garden. One afternoon, Running Wolf brought dried corn husks soaked in water. With nimble fingers, he demonstrated how to fold and tie them into the shape of a small doll. For children, he explained, his voice holding a rare tenderness. My son had many. Rebecca watched his hands create something beautiful from what would have been discarded. Would you teach me? By evening, they had created several corn husk dolls of varying quality. Rebecca's attempts were clumsy compared to Running Wolf's practiced skill, but he nodded approvingly at her progress. Good hands, he said. Learn quick. Rusty lay between them, head resting on paws, content in their shared company. Outside, the cattle lowed softly in the cooling air. When I was a girl, Rebecca said, holding one of the dolls, I imagined I'd make these with my daughter someday. The admission felt both painful and freeing, acknowledging the future that had been stolen from her. Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment. Life walks on paths we not choose, he finally said. New paths wait. The harvest continued through September. Running Wolf taught Rebecca the Apache words for the vegetables they gathered, and she shared English terminology he hadn't encountered. Their vocabularies expanded together, building bridges between their different worlds. As the garden yielded its bounty, Rebecca felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything since before her losses. She had created something life-sustaining with her own hands, coaxing food from the hard desert soil. One evening, as the sun painted the western sky in spectacular colors, Rebecca prepared a special meal to celebrate the harvest. She used vegetables from her garden and herbs. Running Wolf had shown her in the surrounding landscape. They ate outside, watching twilight soften the rugged terrain. Rusty dozed nearby, occasionally opening one eye to check for scraps. In my tribe, Running Wolf said, harvest brings Thanksgiving ceremony. Many prayers, many songs. He hesitated. Would you hear one? Rebecca nodded, honored by the offer. Running Wolf's singing voice was different from his speaking tone, deeper, more resonant. The unfamiliar melody rose and fell like the landscape around them, words she couldn't understand carrying meaning she somehow felt. When he finished, silence hung between them, rich with unspoken thoughts. That was beautiful, Rebecca said finally. What does it mean? Thanks to earth for food, thanks to sky for rain, thanks to life for... He paused, searching for the right word, continuing. Rebecca thought about continuing, how she had been merely surviving until she stopped here, how gradually she had begun truly living again. I haven't thought about leaving in a long time, she realized aloud. Running Wolf's eyes met hers across the small fire. Good, he said simply. That night, writing in her journal, Rebecca noted the date and added, I believe I've found where I belong. Not the place I expected, not the life I planned, but somehow right all the same. She placed a corn husk doll beside her Beda, symbol of something new taking shape from what remained of the past. October arrived with paintbrush strokes of gold and crimson. The cottonwoods along the creek blazed yellow against the blue sky, and mornings dawned with increasing chill. Rebecca had never experienced autumn in the desert. The subtle changes fascinated her, so different from Pennsylvania's dramatic seasonal transformation. Winter comes soon, Running Wolf said one morning as they inspected the cattle together. Not much snow here, but cold nights. Rebecca had been preparing. The adobe walls were sturdy, but she had spent weeks sealing cracks and gathering firewood. In the evenings, she worked on a patchwork quilt, combining fabric she'd brought from her previous life with material Running Wolf had traded for at a distant settlement. The quilt was nearly finished, now a tangible blending of her past and present. She ran her fingers over a square cut from one of Sarah's baby blankets, sewn beside a piece of cotton Running Wolf had acquired. The contrast in textures told its own story. We should hunt, Running Wolf suggested as they watched the sun rise. Meat for winter. Rebecca nodded. Though she had purchased supplies from occasional traders, fresh meat would be welcome. I can shoot, she said. My father taught me. Running Wolf's eyebrows raised slightly. Show me. Later that morning, as they walked through the scrub a mile from the cabin, Rebecca spotted a jackrabbit. In one fluid motion, she raised her rifle, aimed, and fired. The rabbit fell instantly. Running Wolf examined her kill with new respect. Clean shot. Good eye. Rebecca felt an unexpected pride at his approval. In Philadelphia, her shooting skills had been considered peculiar at best, inappropriate at worst. Here, they were simply useful. They hunted together through the afternoon, with Rusty eagerly retrieving their kills. Rebecca demonstrated that her first shot hadn't been lucky. She consistently hit what she aimed at, whether stationary or moving. "Where learned this?" Running Wolf asked as they headed back, their game bags full. "My father believed women should know how to protect themselves," Rebecca explained. "We lived in the city, but he took me to the countryside to practice." Wise father. At the edge of a small rise, they encountered 3 Apache men on horseback. Rebecca tensed, but Running Wolf raised his hand in greeting. Words were exchanged in their language too rapid for Rebecca to catch the few phrases she knew. The men regarded her with undisguised curiosity. One, older than the others, spoke directly to her in broken English. "You are the woman who stays on Talks with Spirits Land." Rebecca glanced at Running Wolf, realizing she'd never heard his Apache name before. "Yes," she answered simply. "He has been kind to me." The man studied her thoughtfully. "Our cousin walks his own path," he said, nodding toward Running Wolf. "Always has, but the path grows dangerous now." More words were exchanged in Apache, the tone tense but not hostile. Rebecca couldn't follow the conversation, but she sensed concerns being voiced and defended. Before the men departed, the older one looked once more at Rebecca. "Cold comes soon," he said. "Many kinds of cold." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Running Wolf before they rode away. "Your family?" Rebecca asked as they continued walking. "My cousin Gray Fox. Others from winter camp." Running Wolf's expression was troubled. "They don't approve of me staying here. Some yes, some no. Many worry about army, about war." Rebecca thought of Lieutenant Edwards and his warnings. "Will there be fighting?" Running Wolf sighed. "Always fighting somewhere, but my people tired. Too many seasons of war." That night, the first frost arrived unexpectedly early. Rebecca woke to a silvery coating on the landscape, delicate ice crystals transforming every surface. The remaining garden plants drooped under the weight of frost. Running Wolf appeared at first light, concern evident. Together, they worked quickly to save what crops remained, covering some, harvesting others ahead of the deeper cold that would follow. Their hands brushed as they worked side by side, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Rebecca looked up to find Running Wolf watching her, something unspoken in his eyes. The moment hung between them, like the frost-laden air, crystalline, transformative, fragile. A sudden commotion from the cattle broke the spell. One of the younger cows had slipped on the icy ground, bellowing in distress. They hurried to help, the unacknowledged moment passing like morning mist. That evening, as Rebecca stitched the final pieces of her quilt by firelight, she wondered about the different kinds of cold Gray Fox had mentioned, and about the unexpected warmth she'd felt in that brief, suspended moment among the frost. November descended with unexpected ferocity. The desert, which had seemed perpetually sun-baked when Rebecca first arrived, revealed its winter face cold, clear, and unforgiving. Nights dropped well below freezing, and the wind found every imperfection in the adobe walls. Rebecca's completed quilt became essential, its warmth a barrier against the chill that seemed to seep from the ground itself. Rusty slept pressed against her side, their shared body heat a comfort in the darkness. With the garden now dormant, Rebecca focused on the cattle and on further improvements to the cabin. Running Wolf brought additional supplies, thicker hides for the door, clay to seal cracks, dried herbs that filled the small space with earthy aromas. During one visit, he presented her with a small object carved from bone. "Whistle," he explained, demonstrating how to blow through it to produce a clear, penetrating note. "For Quechua ha, for hunting." Rebecca tried it, producing a wavering sound. Rusty's ears perked up immediately, his head tilting in curiosity. Running Wolf smiled a rare expression that transformed his usually stoic features. "He knows his name now." As the days shortened, Rebecca found herself struggling with memories she thought she'd come to terms with. The previous winter had brought the influenza that claimed Thomas and Sarah. Cold weather carried echoes of sick rooms, of desperate prayers, of caskets lowered into frozen ground. Running Wolf noticed her withdrawal, Bad spirits visit you, he observed one evening as they sat by the fire. Rebecca looked up from the flames that had hypnotized her into painful recollection. This time last year, my husband and daughter were dying, she said quietly. I couldn't save them. Running Wolf was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into the pouch at his waist and removed several small items of feather, a stone, a bundle of herbs. He arranged them carefully on the ground between them. My people honor dead with ceremony, he said. Not forget, but help spirits rest, help living continue. How? Rebecca asked, tears threatening. He explained gently, showing her how to use the objects in a simple ritual of remembrance. As Rebecca followed his guidance, speaking her family's names aloud, describing their lives rather than their deaths, something tight within her chest began to loosen. The next day brought snow unusual for the region, Running Wolf explained. By midday, white blanketed the landscape, transforming familiar surroundings into something magical and strange. Rusty bounded through the drifts with puppyish enthusiasm, snapping at falling flakes. His antics drew a genuine laugh from Rebecca first in longer than she could remember. The snow continued into the night, becoming a blizzard that howled around the cabin. Running Wolf, who had intended to return to his own shelter, was forced to remain. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, the storm creating an unexpected intimacy as it isolated them from the rest of the world. Tell me about your wife, Rebecca said softly, surprising herself with the request. Running Wolf looked up sharply, but his expression softened as he met her eyes. Morningstar was strong woman, good heart. Laughed much. His voice held a tenderness Rebecca hadn't heard before. Good mother to our son. What was his name? Little Fox. A smile touched his lips. Always curious, always questions. The shared confidences continued as the storm raged outside. Running Wolf spoke of Apache traditions, of his childhood learning from his grandfather, of his growing disagreement with those who wanted endless war with the white settlers. In turn, Rebecca shared stories of Philadelphia, of Thomas's passion for teaching, of Sarah's bright spirit. For the first time, she found she could speak of them without drowning in grief. As the night deepened, Running Wolf began telling Apache legends creation stories, tales of trickster animals, explanations for the stars above. His voice took on a rhythmic quality, the English words interspersed with Apache terms that needed no translation to convey their meaning. Rebecca listened, wrapped in her patchwork quilt, as the wind's voice joined his storytelling. When she finally dozed off, her dreams were not of sick rooms, but of desert landscapes where foxes ran beneath star-filled skies. Morning revealed a transformed world, every harsh edge softened by snow, every familiar landmark made new. Rusty romped through the white expanse, leaving chaotic trails of paw prints. Running Wolf stood at the door, watching the dog's joy with quiet amusement. He shows the way, he commented. Find happiness in new things. Rebecca looked at him, understanding he meant more than just Rusty's reaction to snow. Yes, she agreed. I think perhaps he does. December brought clearer skies but deepening cold. Rebecca's supplies, though carefully rationed, were dwindling. Coffee was a distant memory, salt a precious commodity, and flour almost gone. Need to trade, Running Wolf said after inspecting her stores. Jensen's Post. 2 days' ride. Rebecca hesitated. She hadn't ventured far from the cabin since her arrival months ago. The idea of facing others, especially after Lieutenant Edwards' visit, filled her with apprehension. I'll go alone, Running Wolf offered, reading her expression. No, Rebecca decided. I should come. We'll take the wagon. She didn't articulate her concern about how Running Wolf might be treated alone at a trading post frequented by settlers. They prepared carefully, securing the cattle and leaving extra feed. Rusty would accompany them. Rebecca couldn't bear to leave him behind, and his presence might deter trouble. They loaded the wagon with items to trade, dried herbs, carefully tanned hides, corn husks, dolls Rebecca had crafted with increasing skill. The journey began at dawn. Though the distance wasn't great, the winter-hardened trails slowed their progress. They camped the first night under brilliant stars, Rusty alert for coyotes drawn to their fire. First time away from cabin since coming, Running Wolf observed as they shared a simple meal. Rebecca nodded. It feels strange. I've grown used to the place. She'd almost said our home, catching herself at the last moment. Running Wolf noticed the hesitation but said nothing, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. By mid-afternoon the next day, they spotted Jensen's trading poster cluster of low buildings surrounding a main structure. Wagons and horses indicated several other visitors. Many people, Running Wolf commented, his posture subtly changing, becoming more guarded. "Stay close to me," Rebecca said impulsively, then felt foolish. Who was she to offer protection to a man who had survived decades in this harsh land? Yet Running Wolf nodded, something unreadable passing across his features. The trading post's interior was dim after the bright winter sunlight. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with necessities and rare luxuries. The smell of coffee, tobacco, and leather mingled in the air. Jensen himself stood behind a rough-hewn counter-bear of a man with a grey-streaked beard. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Rebecca and Running Wolf entering together. "Well now," he rumbled, "don't often see such a pair." Rebecca approached confidently, though she felt the stares of the other customers, mostly men in trail-worn clothes, a few women in faded dresses. "We've come to trade," she stated, displaying their goods. Jensen examined their offerings with professional assessment. "Fair quality?" he allowed, though his gaze kept shifting between Rebecca and Running Wolf. "Where you hailing from, ma'am?" "East of here," Rebecca replied vaguely, "near the creek junction." "Caldwell Place," a voice interjected. A rancher Rebecca vaguely recognized from her first weeks stepped forward. "Abandoned homestead." Army patrol mentioned a woman was living there. His gaze hardened on Running Wolf. "Didn't mention company." The atmosphere in the room thickened. Rusty pressed against Rebecca's skirts, sensing tension. "The land belongs to Running Wolf," Rebecca said clearly. "I stay there with his permission and tend his cattle." Murmurs rippled through the gathered settlers. A woman near the back clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Ain't proper," she pronounced. "White woman living with a savage." "He is my friend," Rebecca replied firmly, "and I would appreciate the same courtesy you'd show any other customer." Jensen, sensing business at risk, intervened. "What supplies you needing today?" Rebecca listed their requirements, while Running Wolf stood silently beside her. Jensen filled their order efficiently, though his prices seemed higher than what others were paying, a tax on their unusual partnership. While Jensen's assistant gathered their supplies, Rebecca noticed a display case containing personal items, combs, mirrors, simple jewelry. A silver hair comb caught her eye, its design reminiscent of one her mother had owned. On impulse, she added it to their purchases, aware of Running Wolf watching her selection with interest. As they loaded the wagon, a group of men loitered nearby, their conversation deliberately audible. "Army says Victorio's band hit a ranch down south. Killed everyone, even the children. That's Indians for you. Can't trust a one of them." Running Wolf's face remained impassive, but Rebecca saw the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in his movements. "Heard tell the army's planning a big push come spring," another man added. "Clean out the whole territory." Rebecca climbed onto the wagon seat, her jaw tight with anger at the deliberate baiting. Running Wolf joined her silently. As they drove away, Jensen called after them, "Winter's getting worse, ma'am. Offer stands to escort you to Tucson any time." They traveled in silence until well away from the trading post. Finally, Rebecca touched Running Wolf's arm lightly. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Not your words," he replied, but his face remained troubled. That night, by their campfire, Rebecca removed the silver comb from her purchases and ran her fingers through her hair, the first time in months. She'd thought about her appearance as anything but practical. Running Wolf watched the firelight catch the silver and reflect in her loosened hair. For a moment, something other than winter shadows darkened his eyes. Winter gradually loosened its grip as February gave way to March. The desert awakened with surprising vigor. Cacti sprouted buds, wildflowers emerged in protected hollows, and the creek flowed stronger with snowmelt from distant mountains. Rebecca found herself humming as she prepared the garden for new planting. The songs were old ones, lullabies she'd sung to Sarah, hymns from the Philadelphia church of her childhood. Music she hadn't realized she remembered until it spilled unbidden from her lips. She paused, trowel in hand, struck by the realization that she hadn't written in her journal about her past life in months. The leather-bound book lay in her trunk, untouched since before the first frost. Rusty bounded up, interrupting her thoughts with a joyful bark. Running Wolf followed, leading his horse. He'd been away for several days, visiting his tribe's winter camp. "The garden wakes," he observed, looking at her freshly turned soil. "Like the world." Rebecca smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "Did you have a good visit with your people?" A complexity of emotions crossed his face. Many talks, some good, some hard. He hesitated, then added, "I bring something." From his saddlebag, he withdrew a small clay pot containing a seedling plant Rebecca didn't recognize, with silver-green leaves and a sturdy stem. "Desert sage," he explained, offering it to her. "Sacred plant, good medicine, good spirit." Rebecca accepted it carefully. "It's beautiful. Will you show me where to plant it?" Together, they selected a spot at the edge of the garden where the seedling would have room to grow. As they worked the soil, their hands occasionally brushed, each contact sending a warmth through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the strengthening spring sun. "My people say sage connects earth and sky," Running Wolf explained as they settled the plant. "Helps prayers reach Creator." "What do you pray for?" Rebecca asked softly. He met her eyes. "Peace, understanding between different peoples, good future." He paused. "What you pray for?" Rebecca considered the question as she patted soil around the sage. A year ago, her prayers had been desperate pleas for her family's lives, then bitter questions about why they were taken. Now, strength, she said finally, clarity, and lately, happiness again, someday. Running Wolf nodded as if her answer satisfied him. Good prayers, strong heart. That afternoon, as Rebecca collected eggs from the chickens she'd acquired from a passing trader, she heard an unfamiliar sound, the approach of a lone rider. The man who reined in before her cabin was neither soldier nor settler, but wore the dusty clothes of a mail carrier. He tipped his hat. "Mrs. Caldwell, been looking for you these past months. Got a letter forwarded from Fort Bowie." Rebecca accepted the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing her sister-in-law's handwriting. The man declined her offer of water and continued on his route, leaving Rebecca alone with this unexpected connection to her past. She sat on the cabin step, Rusty pressing against her leg as she opened the letter. Martha's words spilled across the page's concern about Rebecca's abrupt departure after the funerals, news of Philadelphia, and finally an offer. "Father's health continues to decline. The house feels empty without Thomas's family. Please consider returning to us. There is always a place for you here." Rebecca lowered the letter, her thoughts churning. For the first time since arriving, the possibility of leaving, of returning east, presented itself as a real option rather than a fear-driven escape. Running Wolf found her still sitting there as sunset painted the landscape in gold and crimson. He said nothing, but his gaze took in the letter in her hands, the troubled expression on her face. "News from before time," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "My husband's family," Rebecca confirmed. "They want me to return." Running Wolf's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, a quickly masked pain. "You think of going?" Rebecca looked around at the homestead, the garden with its new plantings, the contented cattle, the cabin she had transformed from abandoned shelter to home. Her gaze returned to Running Wolf, standing patiently before her. "I don't know," she admitted. "A few months ago I wouldn't have hesitated. But now different," he supplied when she trailed off. "Yes." Rebecca folded the letter carefully. "Everything is different now." That night, unable to sleep, Rebecca stepped outside into the cool spring air. The desert lay silvered in moonlight, beautiful in ways she'd never noticed when first arriving. Rusty padded silently beside her as she walked to the edge of the garden. The desert sage seedling stood small but resolute in its new place. Rebecca knelt beside it, remembering Running Wolf's words about prayers. "I don't know what to do," she whispered to the night sky. "I don't know where I belong anymore." But as the words left her lips, she recognized their untruth. She did know where she belonged. The realization frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. April brought warming days and the vibrant green of new growth. Rebecca had written a carefully worded reply to Martha, neither accepting nor rejecting the offer to return east, but explaining she needed time to consider her future. The act of posting the letter at Jensen's trading post had felt significant, a deliberate choice to remain, at least for now. Running Wolf arrived one morning with unusual formality in his bearing. "My people call council," he said. "Important matters. I must go." Rebecca nodded, having expected this. Rumors of increased tensions between settlers and Apaches had reached even their isolated homestead. "When will you return?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Running Wolf hesitated. 3 days, maybe more. He seemed to struggle with something before adding, "You could come, if want to." Rebecca stared at him in surprise. "To an Apache council?" "Few white eyes ever invited," he acknowledged. "But you different. You understand land, respect ways." He paused. "My father asks to meet woman who stays." "Your father?" In all their months together, Running Wolf had rarely mentioned his living family. "Medicine man of winter camp," he explained. "Respected elder." The invitation both honored and terrified Rebecca. Would it be appropriate? Would I be welcome? "Some yes, some no," Running Wolf admitted. "But important, I think, for understanding." 2 days later, they rode toward the Apache encampment, Rebecca on her mare, Running Wolf on his pinto stallion, and Rusty trotting alongside. They had left the cattle in the care of Gray Fox's son, who had agreed somewhat reluctantly to watch the homestead. As they journeyed, Running Wolf explained more about his people's governance, how decisions were made by consensus, how different bands maintained independence while sharing kinship. "My father sees beyond, leads in spiritual matters," he explained. "War chief, bear walks tall, leads in battle. Together with other elders, they guide people." "And you?" Rebecca asked. "What is your role?" A complicated expression crossed his face. "Once respected warrior, then questioned old ways, spoke against endless war. Now," he shrugged, "outside voice." The Apache camp appeared suddenly in a protected valley, a collection of dome-shaped wickiups arranged in family clusters. Children playing at the outskirts spotted them first, running to spread news of their arrival. Rebecca felt the weight of curious and suspicious gazes as they dismounted. Running Wolf stood tall beside her, his presence both shield and statement. An elderly man emerged from a central wickiup, his face deeply lined, his bearing dignified, despite stooped shoulders. Running Wolf approached him with evident respect, speaking soft words in Apache. The old man's piercing gaze shifted to Rebecca. "My father sees beyond," Running Wolf introduced in English. Rebecca inclined her head respectfully. "I am honored to meet you." Sees Beyond studied her with unnerving intensity before speaking in his language. Running Wolf translated, "He says your spirit has colors he has not seen in a white woman before." Other tribal members gathered, including Gray Fox and a powerfully built man whose scarred face suggested many battles. "Bear walks tall," Running Wolf identified quietly, "War Chief." The council convened that afternoon in a larger structure. Rebecca sat beside Running Wolf, acutely aware of being the only non-Apache present. Rusty remained close, unusually subdued, as if sensing the solemnity of the occasion. The discussions, conducted primarily in Apache with Running Wolf translating key points, centered on increasing encroachment by settlers and the Army's expanding presence. "Cattle ranchers push east from Tucson," Bear Walks Tall argued forcefully. "Miners come from north. Army builds new posts. Where Apache's supposed to go?" An older woman spoke passionately about children growing hungry as traditional hunting grounds diminished. Others described confrontations with settlers, broken agreements, threats from soldiers. Rebecca listened, understanding more than ever Running Wolf's complex position. When several speakers directed comments toward her, some accusatory, others genuinely questioning, she responded with honesty about her experiences, both east and west. The most striking moment came when Seas Beyond rose to speak. Though physically frail, his presence commanded absolute attention. He spoke at length, occasionally gesturing toward Rebecca and Running Wolf. "My father says 2 paths lie before Apache people," Running Wolf translated quietly. "Path of war leads to blood, to fewer children each season. Path of finding new way leads through uncertain country, but maybe to future. The old man removed something from a pouch at his waist, a ceremonial pipe adorned with feathers and beadwork. To Rebecca's surprise, he extended it toward Running Wolf. He asks me to carry pipe to council fire, Running Wolf explained, a muscle working in his jaw. Honor I left behind many seasons ago. The significance wasn't lost on Rebecca. By accepting the pipe, Running Wolf would be rejoining tribal leadership, taking a voice in decisions that would affect his people's future. As his hand closed around the sacred object, his eyes met Rebecca's briefly. In that glance lay both apology and question, and acknowledgement that accepting this role would complicate whatever grew between them. The council continued into evening, fires illuminating solemn faces as the Apache people confronted their narrowing options in a changing world. Rebecca watched Running Wolf move between cultures, translating not just words but world views, and realized how truly rare his perspective was, and how essential it might prove for both their futures. The council lasted 3 days. Rebecca watched Running Wolf grow into a role she hadn't fully understood, before respected voice, mediator between tradition and necessary change, son reconnecting with a father whose approval clearly mattered deeply. They returned to the homestead quieter than when they'd left, both processing the experience. Running Wolf now carried additional responsibilities. Rebecca had glimpsed a world few white people ever saw. May arrived with spectacular wildflower blooms transforming the desert. Rebecca's garden flourished, and a new calf had been born to one of the cow signs of prosperity that should have brought uncomplicated joy. Yet Rebecca sensed change approaching as inevitably as summer heat. Running Wolf visited less frequently, his tribal duties claiming more time. When he did come, their conversations carried new undercurrents, things unsaid, but felt between them. One morning, as Rebecca collected eggs from the chicken coop, Rusty's alert bark announced approaching riders. She shaded her eyes, recognizing the uniform blue of cavalry before identifying Lieutenant Edwards at the head of a small patrol. Rebecca straightened her apron and walked out to meet them, Rusty at her heels. "Mrs. Caldwell," Edwards greeted her, dismounting with a tired smile. "Good to see you well." "Lieutenant," she nodded, "what brings the army this way?" Edwards removed his hat, revealing sweat-dampened hair. "Routine patrol, primarily. But I also bring news you might find interesting." He accepted the water Rebecca offered, drinking deeply before continuing. "The government has approved new land grants for homesteaders willing to establish themselves in designated territories." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew an official-looking document. "This is a preliminary offer, a deed to 160 acres near Tucson." Rebecca took the paper with surprise. "I don't understand." "The Army's establishing a buffer zone of settler properties," Edwards explained. "Stable homesteads run by solid citizens help secure the territory." His gaze swept her modest property. "You've proven your ability to make a go of things in difficult circumstances. The land being offered is prime farmland, good soil, reliable water." Rebecca glanced at the document. "And the current residents of this territory?" Edwards' expression hardened slightly. "It's government land, ma'am. The Apache claims have been addressed through proper treaties." Rebecca doubted the Apache would describe the process as proper, but she kept this thought to herself. "Why me specifically?" she asked instead. "Frankly, ma'am, we need more women of good character in the territory. You'd be welcomed in the Tucson community, have neighbors, access to proper society." He hesitated before adding, "and you'd be safer there." "I've been quite safe here," Rebecca countered. Edwards sighed. "Mrs. Caldwell, I speak plainly. Tensions are rising. The peace we've maintained is fragile at best. This location," he gestured to the surrounding landscape, "will likely become unstable in coming months." Rebecca thought of the council, of Bear Walks Tall's anger, of the divisions among the Apache themselves about how to respond to continued encroachment. "I appreciate the offer, Lieutenant, but this is my home now." "Is it?" Edwards asked quietly. "Or is it borrowed land that might be reclaimed?" His gaze flickered toward the ridge where Running Wolf sometimes appeared. "Your friendship with the Apache may not protect you if wider conflicts ignite." A shadow fell across Rebecca's garden. She turned to see Running Wolf standing at the edge of the property, watching silently. How long he had been there, how much he had overheard, she couldn't tell. Edwards followed her gaze, his posture stiffening. "Think carefully about your future, Mrs. Caldwell. This offer won't remain open indefinitely." After the soldiers departed, Rebecca approached Running Wolf, the land deed still in her hand. "You heard?" she asked. "Enough." His face was impassive, but his eyes held questions. "They're offering land near Tucson. Apparently, they need women of good character to civilize the territory." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Better land, safer place." Running Wolf's tone revealed nothing of his thoughts. "White neighbors instead of Apache friend." "Is that what you think I want?" Rebecca asked, hurt by his apparent assumption. Running Wolf's gaze dropped to the document she still held. "What you want, not always clear, even to you." That evening, Rebecca sat alone at her table, the land deed spread before her. The offer represented security, legitimacy, a return to society. Yet the thought of leaving this place, leaving Running Wolf, created a physical ache in her chest. Outside, darkness fell over the landscape that had transformed from alien to beloved. Rusty whined softly, sensing her distress. "What should I do, boy?" she whispered, running her fingers through his golden fur. For once, his wise brown eyes offered no answer. The land deed remained on Rebecca's table for days, its presence a constant reminder of the choice before her. Running Wolf's visits grew shorter, his manner more reserved. The easy companionship they had developed over months seemed suddenly fragile. June brought oppressive heat and the building tension of approaching monsoon season. Dark clouds gathered daily on the horizon, but dispersed without delivering rainer meteorological reflection of Rebecca's emotional state. One evening, as Rebecca repaired a fence post damaged by a restless bull, Running Wolf arrived with supplies and news. "Army moves more soldiers to fort," he reported, his face grim. "My people say they bring more guns, more horses." Rebecca drove a nail with perhaps more force than necessary. Lieutenant Edwards implied as much. Running Wolf watched her work for a moment. "You decide about paper? About Tucson land?" "No." Rebecca set down her hammer, wiping sweat from her brow. "Have you decided what you think I should do?" His eyes met hers. "Not my choice to make." "But you have an opinion," she pressed. "After all this time, you must have some thought about whether I should stay or go." Running Wolf's jaw tightened. "You came here running from death. Maybe now you run toward life." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "Life in Tucson, with your kind." "My kind," Rebecca repeated, anger flaring suddenly. "And what exactly is my kind?" Running Wolf. "People who judge you without knowing you. People who take land through papers and treaties they have no intention of honoring. People who will not be hunted when fighting starts," he countered, his own anger finally showing. "People who army protects, not shoots." "Is that what you want? For me to go where it's safe while your people face rifles and soldiers?" Rebecca felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. "After everything we've—" She stopped herself. "Everything we what?" Running Wolf stepped closer, his voice dropping. "What are we, Rebecca Caldwell? White woman, Apache man, what future exists?" The question hung between them, unanswerable and raw. Before Rebecca could respond, thunder cracked overhead the storm, finally breaking after days of threatening. "Cattle," Running Wolf said, "practical concerns overriding emotional ones. Need shelter before hard rain." They worked quickly, driving the herd toward the reinforced corral as wind whipped dust into blinding clouds. The first heavy raindrops fell as they secured the gate. "Old fence on east side weak," Running Wolf shouted over the rising storm. "Need more support." Rebecca nodded, grabbing additional lumber as the rain intensified. They reached the eastern fence line just as a powerful gust threatened to topple it completely. Working side by side in the downpour, they fought to secure the structure. Rebecca's hands slipped on rain-slick wood, and a splintered post gouged her palm. "You're hurt," Running Wolf observed, taking her hand in his. "It's nothing," Rebecca tried to pull away, but he held firm, examining the wound through the curtain of rain. The storm's fury increased around them, lightning splitting the sky, thunder shaking the ground, rain falling in blinding sheets. Yet in that moment, the only reality Rebecca registered was Running Wolf's hand holding hers, his face close enough that she could see raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. A tremendous crack shattered the moment, not thunder, but the sound of wood giving way as a section of fence collapsed. Cattle bellowed in alarm as several broke through the opening, scattering into the storm-lashed landscape. "North, draw dangerous in flood," Running Wolf shouted. "Must get them back." They separated, Rebecca heading west, while Running Wolf pursued cattle moving east. Rusty, responding to Rebecca's whistle, splashed through puddles that were rapidly becoming streams. The next hour passed in chaotic urgency, locating frightened cattle in near-zero visibility, herding them back through driving rain, repairing the fence in sodden conditions. Communication reduced to shouted fragments between thunderclaps. By the time the last cow was secured, both Rebecca and Running Wolf were exhausted, drenched, and mud-covered. As they trudged back toward the cabin, Rebecca noticed Rusty limping badly. "He's hurt," she cried, kneeling beside the dog. A deep gash ran along his shoulder, where he'd apparently been caught on something sharp while herding cattle. Running Wolf examined the wound with gentle hands. "Need medicine, clean stitches." Inside the cabin, they worked together to treat Rusty's injury, Running Wolf's knowledge of healing plants combining with Rebecca's steady hands to clean and close the wound. The dog whimpered, but remained still, trusting them completely. As the storm's intensity finally began to wane, Rebecca looked up to find Running Wolf watching her with an expression that mirrored her own tumultuous emotions. "We work well together," she said softly. "We always have." Running Wolf nodded, his hand resting on Rusty's good shoulder. "Yes, but storms pass. Choices remain." Outside, the broken fence post stood as testament to the storm's destructive power and to what could be repaired when they worked as one. The days following the storm carried a fragile truce. Running Wolf helped Rebecca repair the damaged fence and other storm casualties, but the easy companionship of before remained elusive. Their conversations stayed focused on practical matters, neither willing to revisit the raw emotions the storm had exposed. Rusty's wound healed quickly, though he favored his injured shoulder. The dog seemed to sense the tension, dividing his attention equally between Rebecca and Running Wolf, as if trying to keep them connected. Rebecca had pushed the land deed into a drawer, unable to discard it, yet unwilling to look at it daily. Still, its presence haunted her thoughts. The deadline for her response, approached Lieutenant Edwards, had indicated he would return by month's end for her answer. One morning, Running Wolf arrived earlier than usual, his expression grave. "News from winter camp," he said as Rebecca offered him coffee. "My father is sick, asks for me." Rebecca felt a pang of concern. "Is it serious?" "Old man's sickness comes and goes." Running Wolf's face softened slightly. "But he speaks of seeing my mother soon. Signs not good." "You should go to him right away," Rebecca said, understanding the implicit goodbye in his words. Running Wolf nodded. "We'll be gone maybe many days." "Maybe." He left the thought unfinished. As he prepared to leave, he reached into his pouch and withdrew something, two eagle feathers, bound together with sinew and a small blue bead. "For you," he said, extending the simple token. "Among my people, feathers tied together means paths joining. Blue bead is for clear sky between." Rebecca accepted the gift, her throat tight with emotion. "Is this goodbye, Running Wolf?" His dark eyes held hers. "I return if I can, but times change fast now." He glanced toward the east, where Fort Bowie lay beyond the horizon. "Lieutenant comes soon for answer." "I haven't decided yet," Rebecca said, though she realized this wasn't entirely true. Her heart had decided, her mind was simply catching up. "I think you have," Running Wolf replied gently. "Just not ready to say." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, Rusty whining softly at the impending separation. "Running Wolf," Rebecca called as he turned to go. "What is your true name? Your Apache name?" He looked back, something shifting in his expression. "Talks with spirits," he answered. "Given when I was boy, who heard voices in wind, saw shapes in fire." Rebecca nodded, tucking this intimate knowledge away like a precious stone. Travel safely, talks with spirits. I hope your father recovers. After he disappeared over the ridge, Rebecca stood for a long time, the bound feathers cradled in her palm. Whatever he believed about her decision, she knew with sudden clarity that she couldn't leave this place, couldn't leave him. 3 days later, as Rebecca worked in her garden, Rusty's alert bark announced riders approaching. Lieutenant Edwards led a smaller patrol than before, raising dust in the late afternoon sun. "Mrs. Caldwell," he greeted her, dismounting stiffly, "I trust you've had time to consider the government's generous offer." Rebecca straightened, wiping soil from her hands. "I have, Lieutenant. Would you care for some water?" Over cool drinks in the shade of her porch, Rebecca chose her words carefully. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I must decline. This is my home now." Edwards frowned. "I was afraid you might say that." He set down his cup with deliberate precision. "I should inform you that the situation has changed since my last visit. We've received intelligence about increased Apache activity." "What kind of activity?" Rebecca asked, tension gathering between her shoulders. "Raiding parties hitting isolated settlements, livestock theft, resistance to lawful relocation orders." Edwards' tone hardened. "The Army has authorized preemptive measures to secure the territory." "Preemptive measures," Rebecca repeated. "You mean attacks on Apache camps?" Edwards didn't deny it. "I'm advising all isolated settlers to relocate to protected areas. And the Apache who have committed no hostile acts, what about them?" "The Army makes no distinctions between peaceful and hostile Indians, ma'am. Experience has taught us that loyalty goes to tribe first when conflict erupts." Rebecca heard Running Wolf's words echoed in the lieutenant's statement and felt a chill despite the warm day. "When do these measures begin?" she asked quietly. "Operations are already underway," Edwards replied, watching her closely. "Mrs. Caldwell, I respect your independence, but staying here has become genuinely dangerous. If your friend has any influence with his people, he should advise them to report to the reservation immediately." Rebecca's fingers closed around the bound feathers in her pocket. "Thank you for the warning, Lieutenant. My decision stands." After the soldiers departed, Rebecca sat on her porch steps, watching the sunset paint the landscape in fiery hues. Rusty pressed against her side, offering silent comfort. "He has to come back," she whispered to the dog. "He has to know I'm staying." But beneath her determination lay fear not for herself, but for Running Wolf, riding between two worlds on the edge of war. Days stretched into weeks with no sign of Running Wolf. July brought relentless heat that seemed to press Rebecca's fears deeper into her bones. Each morning, she scanned the horizon. Each evening, she watched the sun set with growing apprehension. Rusty often stood at the eastern ridge, ears pricked, as if expecting Running Wolf's return at any moment. The dog's hopeful vigilance only sharpened Rebecca's worry. Traders passing through brought ominous news. Army patrols had increased throughout the territory. There had been skirmishes with Apache bands near the Mexican border. Some whispered that entire camps had been relocated forcibly to the reservation at San Carlosa Place, the Apache called Iron House, for its prison-like conditions. "No place for a woman alone," one grizzled trader warned Rebecca. "Armies offering escorts to Tucson. Best take them up on it." But Rebecca refused. "I'm waiting for someone," she said simply. "Apache friend?" the man guessed shrewdly. When Rebecca didn't answer, he shook his head. "Might be waiting a long time, ma'am. Armies rounding 'em up by the hundreds." After he left, Rebecca sat on her porch, the bound feathers Running Wolf had given her twisting between her fingers. Had he been captured? Was he hiding in the mountains? Or had he simply chosen to remain with his people during this dangerous time? He would have sent word if he could, she told Rusty, who rested his head on her lap with sympathetic eyes. August arrived. Rebecca's garden yielded its summer bounty, though she took less joy in it than before. She preserved vegetables mechanically, her thoughts always elsewhere. At night, she often stood outside, watching stars wheel overhead and listening for hoofbeats that never came. One evening, settlers from a nearby homestead stopped by a family heading to Tucson under Army escort. "Last chance to join the convoy," the father offered. "Military says this whole area's being cleared. Anyone left behind's on their own." "Thank you, but I'm staying," Rebecca replied with the same answer she'd given everyone. The woman, cradling a small child, looked at Rebecca with mingled pity and exasperation. "Is any man worth risking your life for, especially an Indian?" Rebecca met her gaze steadily. "This isn't just about him. It's about who I've become here, the life I've built. I won't be chased away by fear." After they departed, Rebecca felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened, she had made her choice with open eyes and full heart. That night, a summer thunderstorm rolled across the desert. Rebecca sat by her window, watching lightning illuminate the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. Rusty, usually unsettled by storms, slept peacefully beside her chair. Until suddenly, he wasn't sleeping. The dog's head lifted, ears forward, body tense with alertness rather than fear. He rose and moved to the door, whining softly. "What is it, boy?" Rebecca asked, though hope was already rising in her chest. Rusty scratched at the door once, then looked back at her expectantly. Rebecca grabbed her rifle, caution overriding optimism, and opened the door. Rain fell in silver sheets, obscuring visibility beyond a few yards. Rusty darted out, disappearing into the downpour. Rebecca stepped onto the porch, straining to see through the storm. A figure materialized from the darkness stall, straight-backed despite obvious weariness. Running Wolf walked slowly toward the cabin, his clothes soaked, Rusty circling his legs in joyful greeting. Rebecca set aside her rifle and ran to him, heedless of the rain. She stopped just short of embracing him, suddenly uncertain despite weeks of longing for this moment. "You came back," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. Running Wolf's face, thinner than before, and bearing a new scar along one cheekbone, softened as he looked at her. "I promised." Inside, as Running Wolf dried himself by the fire, Rebecca noticed changes beyond the physical. A new gravity marked his bearing, a deeper solemnity in his eyes. "My father died," he said simply, "good death with family near." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, meaning it deeply. Running Wolf nodded in acknowledgement. "Before going to ancestors, he gave me this." He reached into his pouch and withdrew a single eagle feather, larger and more magnificent than those he had given Rebecca. "Means wisdom passed from father to son, sacred responsibility." Rebecca watched him turn the feather in the firelight. "The army has been looking for your people," she said quietly. "There have been roundups fighting." "I know." Running Wolf's expression darkened. "Many cousins taken to San Carlos, others fight still, hard choices for all." "Lieutenant Edwards returned," Rebecca told him. "I declined the land offer. I'm staying here." She hesitated, then added more softly, "I was waiting for you." Running Wolf met her eyes, something profound and unguarded in his gaze. "Army will come again," he warned. "Path ahead not easy." "No path worth taking ever is," Rebecca replied, finding courage in his presence. "But I'd rather face whatever comes here with you than be safe somewhere else without you." Outside, the storm continued, but within the cabin's walls, something fragile and precious was taking form, as real and tangible as the eagle feather that represented wisdom passing from one generation to the next. September painted the landscape in golden light as summer surrendered to autumn. Rebecca and Running Wolf settled into a new rhythm, different from before but no less harmonious. He stayed at the homestead now rather than coming and going, decision neither discussed but both understood as necessary in these uncertain times. Together they expanded the garden, reinforced the corral, and dug a deeper well. Each improvement spoke of permanence, of shared future, rather than temporary arrangement. In the evenings, Running Wolf shared his father's final teachings, wisdom about living in balance with the land, about finding a middle path when extremes threatened to tear one's world apart. He saw changes coming long before others, Running Wolf explained. Said Apache must find new ways to survive, not just old ways to fight. "A wise man," Rebecca observed. "I wish I could have known him better." "He knew you," Running Wolf replied. "Through my words, through Eagle's vision, said you had strong spirit, good heart." One morning, as they worked side by side harvesting late summer vegetables, Running Wolf paused. His head tilting in the way Rebecca had learned meant he sensed something beyond her awareness. "Riders coming," he said. "Many." Rebecca straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. In the distance, dust signaled approaching horsemen, too many for a routine patrol. "Should you hide?" she asked, fear flickering despite her resolve. Running Wolf shook his head. "No more hiding." Lieutenant Edwards led the column that arrived at Rebecca's homestead, his face registering no surprise at finding Running Wolf there. Behind him rode a dozen soldiers, tense and watchful. "Mrs. Caldwell," Edwards greeted her formally. His gaze shifted to Running Wolf. "I suspected you'd returned." "This is his land," Rebecca said, stepping forward. "I'm here as his guest." Edwards dismounted, removing his hat. "Actually, ma'am, I've come with news that might interest both of you." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew an official document. "The territorial governor has authorized a new approach to Apache relations in this region." Rebecca accepted the paper cautiously, reading it with Running Wolf looking over her shoulder. "A negotiated peace," she said, disbelief coloring her voice. Edwards nodded. "Several Apache bands have agreed to terms that allow them to remain on portions of their traditional lands, provided they register with territorial authorities and maintain peaceful relations." "Why this change?" Running Wolf asked, suspicion evident. "Frankly, the San Carlos experiment has been problematic. Too many Apache, too little food, too much disease." Edwards grimaced. "And I won't pretend military operations have been entirely successful. Both sides are losing good men." Rebecca studied the lieutenant's face, sensing there was more. "Your situation," Edwards continued, gesturing between them, "has been noted by my superiors. An Apache leader peacefully coexisting with a white settler represents the kind of future the governor hopes to encourage." The realization that they had been observed, perhaps even used as an example, should have been unsettling. Instead, Rebecca felt a strange pride that their choice to stand together might somehow benefit others. In the weeks that followed, a small delegation from Running Wolf's tribe arrived: Gray Fox, 2 other elders, and several families willing to test this fragile peace. They established a small encampment near the creek, close enough for community but separate enough to maintain their own ways. On a clear October morning, with cottonwoods blazing gold along the waterway, Rebecca and Running Wolf stood together outside the cabin. Between them, they held a blankheather patchwork quilt combined with a traditional Apache wedding blanket in a seamless blending of patterns and meanings. Gray Fox spoke the Apache blessings, while Rebecca recited vows she remembered from her Philadelphia church. Rusty sat attentively beside them, his golden coat gleaming in the autumn light. No minister officiated, no government paper certified their union. Yet as they wrapped the blended blanket around their shoulders, drawing them together as one, the commitment they made seemed more binding than any Rebecca had known before. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching twilight settle over their shared land, a rider approached a mail carrier with a letter for Rebecca. It was her reply to Martha, finally delivered after many diversions. "I should write again," Rebecca mused, opening the envelope. "Tell them about everything." Running Wolf's hand found hers. "Will they understand?" Rebecca considered the question honestly, perhaps not at first, but they might with time. Later, as stars emerged in the deepening blue, Rebecca thought of all the paths that had led to this moment, grief driving her west, chance bringing her to this particular creek, courage keeping her here when fear suggested flight. "What are you thinking?" Running Wolf asked, his voice gentle in the gathering darkness. Rebecca smiled, leaning against his shoulder as Rusty dozed at their feet and the cattle lowed softly in their pen. "I was thinking about your words when we first met," she replied. "Stay, if you feed my cows." Running Wolf chuckled, the sound still rare enough to delight her. "Simple beginning." "Yes," Rebecca agreed, her heart full. "But it was never really about the cows, was it?" "No," he said, drawing her closer under their blended blanket. "Was about feeding something else, something hungry in both of us." Rebecca nodded, understanding completely. They had fed something in each other that had been starving: hope, belonging, the courage to build something new from the broken pieces of the past. Together, they had learned that hearts, like land, could be healed with patient tending, and that love, like a well-tended garden, could flourish even in the most unlikely soil.